credited with the only successful peace deal. Now, Trump's got some. We hope those end up working for a while. But the Camp David Accord, with co-founding Delta Force with General Schumacher and Boykin, and then, of course, working in other administrations, worked in 5 administrations in regime change and other clandestine operations. And a lot of the things he's talked about here on air, he's revealed first. He also co-wrote a lot of books as kind of the Jack Ryan source for what couldn't be put in a nonfiction book, but was put in the Tom Clancy franchise, which a lot of those got turned into major movies. But in the time we have, let's just get right to it. What was the motive of 9/11? Who was behind it? Why is it important? Because, again, we're not saying radical Islam doesn't exist. We're not saying that, but clearly the stand down, Building 7, how do you want to attack this up front? And you talk about being in rooms with top generals, that said point blank, yeah, it was an inside job. Dr. Steve PIECZENIK, thanks for your courage.
There's no question this was an inside job. Before 9/11, a year before, after having helped Bush Jr. go into the presidency, which was my biggest mistake, I went around to the Department of Defense, and I was asked to look for specific jobs. And as I went around, I saw something very unusual. I saw CIA operatives in every military position that I was interested in, from Solik to other areas, it doesn't matter. I went to Andy Marshall, who was the head of the Office of Net Assessment, trained at the University of Chicago, never served in a war. But I knew he was in charge of Cheney, Rumsfeld, Zalmay Khalilzad, a whole bunch of neocons. And what in fact happened a year later, 4 months before 9/11, I had a knock on the door from 2 Mossad operatives who really didn't know what they were doing. They were quite stupid, which I think Mossad is normally. They knocked on the door in Chevy Chase and asked if they could use my phone. I said, under no condition. They pursued, I threw them out. So when 9/11 came around, the first person they had to ask about what happened was me. And I said, there's no question, this is an inside job. Bush, Cheney, Rumsfeld, Condoleezza Rice, Colin Powell, Steve Hadley, Frank Fukuyama, Richard Pearl, I knew them all. Most of them went to Cornell and the rest went to Yale. And I said, these are the corrupt cowards, what we call chicken hawks, who are involved in creating a 9/11. Now, how did I know that? Not only did I go around and see Doug Feith and others who never belonged at the Department of Defense, I also questioned one of my neighbors, who in fact was a CIA operative at DOD and knew the entire story. And I got from her the entire story of who was involved, the names and people involved. I put it in the book, American Warrior in Crisis, if people want to look at the various names. The key point was that Cheney, Rumsfeld, Cheney in particular, whom I knew from the Nixon administration, as I did Rumsfeld, was a coward, probably the most treasonous coward we have ever had in the United States. He refused to serve us in Vietnam 11 different times with the assistance of his wife, and now he has a daughter who, to me, it's absurd. So what did we learn from that event? Nothing. What I learned from it is, number one, the military can be manipulated and really can't win a war. Our intelligence service, all the way from the CIA, Gina Haspel, to Tenet, to all the others who were in charge, Robert Goss, they were all compromised and were involved. Number 4, I knew Bush Jr. was involved in the same way his father, Bush Sr., was involved in creating a war in the Middle East, which we had no reason to do. Both men, not only Bush Jr., had failed in the military. Contrary to the myth that's propagated about Bush Sr., he was not a war hero. He bailed out of the plane and allowed 8 of his airmen to die. He was a coward. Bush Jr., a coward, corrupt. Cheney, a coward. I said to Rumsfeld, you're a coward. I know exactly what you did. He went on the radio the next day after I accused him and the administration. He said, if somebody accuses the Republicans of doing 9/11, which is called a false flag and a standout, then you have to accuse the Democrats for doing Pearl Harbor. Well, as many of you know, the false flags of Pearl Harbor means that we knew exactly what was going to happen at Pearl Harbor. We wanted to sacrifice 3,000 to 4,000 men in order to precipitate a war. Same way the LBJ had a false flag in Vietnam. John F. Kennedy had a false flag.
Well, let me stop you. Gulf of Tonkin, and that's absolutely true. And let's just go back. Rebuilding America's Defenses, April 1st, 2020, Dick Cheney pens that report for the New American Century and says we need a new Pearl Harbor, 3,000 dead. I don't know how they hit it just right less than a year later. I mean, they really did a good job.
Well, it's not that they did a good job. They were craven individuals. Zalmay Khalilzad worked for me on the West Bank. He's a disaster. He created the war in Afghanistan. He's a CIA operative.
Sure. I was being sarcastic, but I mean, so you knew before it even came, and you were a big member of the CFR, all of this. I remember you resigned after all of this.
I left because I knew exactly who in the CFR was involved in 9/11, and I told them, I'm going to be the first American to lead your organization in, 120 years? I could care less. The CFR was compromised. You had the United States government compromised. Our military intelligence, our civilian intelligence, our Department of Justice was compromised. The White House was compromised, and the House of Representatives sent anything else left. Then what they did was to turn around the narrative and say, God, we are conspiracy truthers, as if we had the burden in order to explain why this coward and moron who was elected twice was involved in a 9/11 stand down and false flag. And we had the biggest coward in our history, a treasonous man. He should have been taken out. He should have gone to jail. Of course, nobody did it. Cheney didn't go to jail. Rumsfeld didn't go to jail. By the way, Black Lives Matter, I'm going to be very nice. We had Colin Powell, Secretary of State, a pathological liar. In Vietnam, he lied about the incidents. And then when he was in the Bush administration, he lied about anthrax. He was as dumb as they come out of CCNY.
Well, let's talk about what was the motive of 9/11. What's the motive?
Let me give you another equal opportunity. Condoleezza Rice, whom I knew very well from Stanford.
She told Willie Brown, do not fly to New York that week, and so was the Joint Chiefs was told. That's all on record.
Correct. But she was a liar, national security advisor, a coward. And what do? They retread everybody. The Hoover Institute right now, you got John Woo, you got Condoleezza Rice. And I said to the Hoover Institute, stick it up. You're out of control. The Rand Corporation, all of these guys out of control. And unfortunately for me, I was not surprised because I'm not a cynic. I'm a realist. I grew up in Europe. I saw the French collaborate with the Germans. I saw the French beat up Algerians, Moroccans, and then assassinate 1 million Tutsis in Rwanda. What I know is that we have lied and we have prevaricated and we killed our own people. Not the first time, not the last time. But if anybody comes out to be sanctimonious about it, they better be careful. Because I was the first one interviewed in this entire episode, and I said under no condition was this Islamic terrorist.
Well, let's talk about that, but you also said right after it happened, you met with the top general who confirmed to you it was staged.
Correct. And I said to the generals, and I sat down with them, I'm not going to name them. I said, you have two choices. Either you resign and I'm going to court-martial you, or you start to rethink what you're doing and get the civilians out of the Pentagon. That meant Doug Feith, Paul Wolfowitz. Eventually, Paul Wolfowitz, a pathetic, cowardly individual who came out of Cornell University, by the way, one of the big universities to push 9/11. It had Paul Wolfowitz, it had Steve Hadley, Frank Fukuyama, and Sandy Berger from the Clinton administration. Cornell never said a word.
Now, Dr. PIECZENIK, stay there. I know people that are in the know understand what you're saying, and most listeners do as well, but let's, I won't say dumb it down, but let's just walk through this when we come back, because you have this civilian take over the military, but they don't know about the consequences, and they do these crazy false flags. We did see a revolution in the military after all this to try to kick them out. How has that gone? And is Trump the culmination of that revolution to get the U.S. military back in control of themselves? We're not going to take it lying down. Look, I went on air that day and knew those were controlled demolitions. I heard them say they blew up Building 7, the CIA headquarters. I got physically sick on air saying elements of our government did that because I love America. I knew it was globalist imposters. And people ask me, once Obama got in and things moved on, why I didn't cover 9/11 as much? Well, because it was about getting that group of neocons and who did that. And I was still exposing false flags, but just I wasn't making my 5th or 6th film on it. I wasn't harping on it every day because people would think then that the government did it when it was criminal elements that did it. And so it actually became destructive of the country. So I want to be clear. people ask, why didn't you keep harping on 9/11? I still talk about it quite a bit. We have guests on. It's important to revisit sometimes, but how do you expose the criminal elements that did this while at the same time not destroying patriotism and having it blow back like the left uses 9/11 to hurt America, when I don't really see it as America that was doing it? You're not just a psychiatrist, you're a old school hand of the world, Dr. PIECZENIK. I mean, how do we address something? Justice be done, may the heavens fall, but at a certain point, I still talk about 9/11, but justice never happened, so then it almost just becomes destructive to constantly cover it.
Not really, my friend. We will not see justice vis-a-vis this issue. We will not. I mean, that's just a point of fact. That's exactly what I've learned the day after that. No one would be held accountable. You and I can repeat the story. We will be put in Wikipedia as truthers, as conspiracy theorists. That's the price that you and I pay for telling the truth. It's the same price when I said, look, Abraham Lincoln was not a great liberator of slaves. He was a tyrant. When he was assassinated, the words were, thus always with tyrants. And so we create our own narratives, which are totally false. You and I will continue that. People will cover that over. When you see Wikipedia, it's pathetic. When I was reading exactly what happened in 9/11, it was pathetic. So they had a separate section which said truthers, what the truthers say. And that's how pathetic intellectualism. You're talking about the end of American intellectualism. You're talking about the end of a capacity that we had at one time.
No, but I agree. But I mean, at the time we come back for 5 hours to do this again because it's so important historically. Because I want to cover, I just want to cover it right. I know you have a lot of gravitas in this area, and what you're saying is a key witness to all this, Dr. PIECZENIK. So if the neocons and others are behind it, they wanted it for a domestic police state to take over the Middle East. In context of 2020, why is it important?
Because you have to understand now that we have a system that really doesn't always work for the people and by the people, except for one little notation, which is important. We have a new person who has not been part of the CIA, not been part of the military, not been part of anything other than business. And his job today is to do business. And that's the only salvation we have, so that whatever. So
it's the maverick, sui generis, of his own kind thing is why they hate Trump, and why and the sui generis movement is the answer.
Correct. I mean, for whatever reasons, we allowed and created a man to come in at this point, whom, ironically, everybody involved in 9/11, including the Democrats, and Biden was involved, and the Clintons were involved, and the Bushes, says, oh, he's a pathological liar. Really?
Have you seen the videos of the day after where he said they clearly blew the towers up with bombs?
Correct. And not only did I see them, but I also heard him say on the same day, because I had followed Trump for over 30, 40 years, he said, those buildings are pretty strong. I wonder how they can bring them down. So he was basically saying exactly what everybody else knew. Now, he will play the part of a president that continues that narrative. But beyond that, he will not trust anybody, and correctly so. He has his own family to work with. He has pointed.
Well, that's why they call him dumb, because he doesn't tell any of those people what he really thinks.
Really? I mean, it's what you and I talked about. You're that dumb that you created all these condominiums, 3.
You're that dumb you just beat the whole deep state and then held him off for 4 years?
Of course, and became a multi-billionaire several times over, although he had bankruptcy. I'd like to be that dumb. I want to be as dumb as somebody like that, who can basically say whatever you want to hear. Woodward, and by the way, Woodward's now getting it. Congratulations to you, Alex. They want to know why Woodward held it for 6 months, a particular secret that was far more lethal. Because Woodward, once again, is a coward. He's a CIA operative out of Yale. It doesn't change. These people have been highly compromised. A friend of mine said to me, why are you attacking the CIA when I was trained by it? And I said to this friend who was head of the U.S. Institute of Peace and came out of MIT, I said to him, you will see why I never belonged to anything except the Republic. I was allowed to join the military. I served 5 presidents, but
because you've got to owe allegiance to the idea and the people and the dirt, not to some corrupt Ivy League elitist institution.
That's exactly what happened. And I said, I pledge allegiance to the Republic. That's why I came back with the generals, Keith Alexander and others, and said, this is your time to be in charge. No more Rumsfeld, no more Cheneys, no more Bushes. I don't want chicken hawks here. I want guys who...
Why do you think Alexander's going over to Amazon?
I'm sorry, Keith Alexander?
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you, he is very, very bright. And
No, you said for a long time he'd be the good head of Cyber Command.
Correct, and he was head of Cyber Command, and then his junior subordinate is Nakasone, who's head of Cyber Command, also excellent. These guys, Keith went to the academy, Nakasone did not, and then I'm proposing a General Brown for the Air Force to be head of Space Command and space warfare. So we have people on board who are going to be able to do things. I'm proud that Keith will take over Amazon. They need him. He understands cyber control. The world has changed in 20 years. Number one, you have become a predominant source of information. The New York Times is gone. The Washington Post is gone. The Wall Street Journal is gone.
Well, I was going to say, I don't know if I've become the prominent thing, but definitely part of it. But yeah, what are they going to do? Because no one believes a damn word they say, and they just keep, like CNN especially, is like a zombie undead creature that won't go away, but no one listens to it.
I mean, what do you want about Anderson Cooper? He's an openly gay guy who forgets to tell you he had 2 internships at the CIA. And once again, he too is compromised. It's almost as if every one of them checked their brains right at the agency or somewhere else. But the truth of the matter is, I could care less about the CIA or the other 16 intelligence units. They're useless.
I was about to say, the issue is these people are followers. Who is in control of them? Because whoever's in control is pretty stupid.
They were stupid, but there's a new guy who's in control, and his name is Grinnell. And I listened to how he was handling the issues as a former ambassador to Germany. Insightful, smart.
Oh, yeah, he confronted the media and said, don't you understand last week? You're obsolete.
Correct. And he said, you're not relevant. You're immature. You're childish. Let me tell you about Serbia and Kosovo. And somebody wanted to ask him about being gay. He said, it's not relevant. Let's talk about policy. So I think Trump put in a great guy in the intelligence network, and I hope he takes down a lot of it, reorganizes it, use Wilbur Ross.
Well, that's my next question. If Trump gets 4 more years, which we hope he does, I think he needs to really clean house. Let's talk about when we come back how you would do that. I know you were called into some administrations to clean house, because we've got to remove all this deadwood. These people are crazy. And now it's come out that Robert Mueller was wiping all the phones illegally, didn't even care, like he was above the law. And they were, I mean, this is just, these people are crazy.
They're not crazy. What they are is, you know, Mueller served us well in Vietnam. And then he had to, what we call suck up to power. And Mueller should be ashamed of himself, because as an Episcopalian, he really he denigrated both our country and both his own religion. And to this day, he has never said mea culpa. This is an intellectual who should have gone out of his way to say, I'm not going to do it.
Well, did he not look completely broken in testimony last year? I mean, he looked like a ghost.
Correct. He was totally unintelligible. But none of them have come forward and say, mea culpa. I've made a mistake. I wanted reform. So the notion of Judeo-Christian overtones in this society is nonsense. It's just a myth. And what comes forth? You got the Alex Jones, alternative media.
Dr. We got to go to break, stephenshane.com. But what I'm asking is, I agree with you. They're a bunch of order followers. So who's in command? Obama, Hillary, Soros? Because I study these people and I watch them, and they have to, they get a script and they follow it even after they've lost. They're still following 3-year-old scripts. Like, there's no one in command. They're following the last election and fighting the last war. And that's actually horrifying. We'll be right back in 2 minutes. Final segment of Steve PIECZENIK. Then the Hodge twins, who are mega viral, join us. Stay with us. We're 52 days out. We are back live. Ted Nugent bringing us in. All right, Steve PIECZENIK, stephenshane.com. Thanks for joining us. We really appreciate you giving us all this time. In the 4 or 5 minutes we have left, I mean, the question I was getting into is, I guess, a little esoteric, but who is in command of the left? Why do they go out of their way to destroy themselves? I don't get self-destruction at that level. And what do you expect them to do in this election? And what should we be watching for in closing?
Basically, you've got nobody in command of this left. What's happening is basically a conglomerate of ineffectual people who had an ideology that once was vibrant for them. But you have a Soros who's funding some things, the Hillary Clintons. They're just names. At this particular point in time, you're not going to have a Democratic Party. As far as I'm concerned, the Republican Party is gone. The party that really is in power is called Trump. And he will appoint those people he needs in order to affect change. The notion of ideological parties at the time of the social media is antiquated. What's relevant now are little pieces of information that comes across at different times on the internet, social media. Most people are getting addicted to it. But in reality, the parties are really antiquated. You don't need a House of Representatives. You don't need a Senate. Those are just welfare victims. What you do need are the governors. And Abbott is important. DeSantis in Florida is exceedingly important because he can do whatever he wants and he can defy the principles of the federal government. The federal government is already breaking up in terms of a cyber nation. The two ends of the East and the West and the South are really non-functional anymore. The cities are empty. So what you have is a new era where a businessman is coming in. He will create peace in different areas of the world. Bahrain will be the next one in terms of a peace treaty, then Oman, and then Saudi Arabia. Then I predict he will have a treaty with Iran and China and North Korea. So what will happen is we expand and peacefully, externally, internally, we'll be imploding pretty much around the Democratic cities and the major cities that are controlled by Democrats. Why? It has to do with the fact that most of them are pretty ineffectual in terms of creating a business or running anything. Cuomo has never run a business. Cuomo's mother is a lovely person whom I know, but both sons are totally dysfunctional. They can talk, they create process, but nothing else. So when you're in the business of process, unlike you and I, where we have a product, you have a product, you have vitamins, you have a content, I have content. That's different from the people who are in the process business, which is politics. Politics will no longer supersede the ongoing relationships that we have in terms of moments of truth, what they will call the alternative truth, i.e. the Alex Jones or the Steve, whatever his name is, PIECZENIK, and you will have a social media where—
And by the way, this is not wishful thinking. You got to come back again soon because you said all this on the show 18 years ago, and I thought you were being too big and optimistic. They've made themselves obsolete, and so everybody ran from the East to the West. They made the West the East. Now they're running to the middle to get away from themselves, and these systems are literally making themselves obsolete and then trying to bully all us into submission, but only destroying themselves faster. It's an incredible process.
Well, it was predictable, and that process really had the final punch, which was coronavirus. Was that incidental or coincidental? I don't have to get into it, but it was not.
But they inflict the biggest lockdowns on themselves to control us, only destroying themselves.
Correct, and that's what happened. We eventually went into self-destruction, which is the final moment of 9/11, where we self-destruct.
Cutting the nose off to spite the face. Amazing. Dr. Steve PIECZENIK, thank you so much.
Thank you, Alex, and God bless.
God bless you. Yeah, big, powerful 9/11 interview.